Before the silence of the desert swallows a man whole, it first teaches him to listen. Not to the wind or the coyotes or the groan of the earth as it settles, but to the space between the sounds. That's where the truth lives. That's where the ghost stories are born. Now, I've been riding this range for 40 years. I've seen flash floods turn bone-dry arroyos into raging rivers in 10 minutes flat. I've seen a pride of mountain lions take down a full-grown steer, and I've seen a man's spirit break under the weight of loneliness. But I had never, not once, seen a man plead with the wind. It was a Tuesday, I think. Tuesdays don't usually matter much out here. The sun bleaches the memory of Mondays, and the promise of Sundays is still a few days off. It was just another day of mending fence line and moving a small herd of yearlings to a new pasture. My horse, a stubborn old bay named Diablo, was feeling his age. He developed a twitch in his left hind leg that made him favor the right, and he was as irritable as a sunstruck rattler. I was thinking about how I was going to have to put him out to pasture soon, maybe let my grandson, Leo, take over the daily rides. The thought sat heavy in my gut, a familiar ache. I was talking to Diablo, just muttering really, telling him he was a good old man, and that we'd have a nice long rest by the creek when we were done. Then the sky changed. It didn't darken with clouds. There wasn't a storm coming. It was more like the color just bled right out of it, leaving behind a flat, shimmering gray that hurt to look at. The air, which had been dry and crisp, grew thick and heavy, tasting of iron and ozone. Diablo snorted and pricked his ears forward, a low, guttural rumble vibrating in his chest. Then he stopped dead. His whole body went rigid and he began to shake. Now, Diablo and I have been through a lot. A charging grizzly, a fire that came within 10 feet of the barn. He was a steady old war horse, but he was trembling like a foal and he was looking at a patch of nothing, just a bare stretch of dirt and sagebrush. I nudged him with my heels, nothing. I pulled on the reins, trying to turn him. He wouldn't budge. He just stood there, frozen in fear, staring into that empty space. That's when the air started to twist. It wasn't a tornado, not a dust devil or anything of the sort. It was a localized, violent upheaval of the atmosphere itself. The dust and pebbles on the ground began to jump and swirl, not in a circle but upward like something was being pulled from the earth. The sagebrush flattened and a low hum, a vibration I could feel in my teeth and in the marrow of my bones, began to build. Diablo screamed. It was a horrible, high-pitched sound of pure animal terror. He bucked hard and I wasn't ready for it. I hit the ground with a grunt, the wind knocked out of me. I rolled, getting a mouthful of dirt, and when I looked up, the air in front of me was splitting. It was like someone had taken a jagged knife and cut a seam in the fabric of the world, a shimmering vertical scar of pale blue and silver light. And from that scar a man, no, a boy, stumbled out and collapsed in the dirt. The air snapped back into place, with a deafening crack that sent Diablo galloping for the horizon. I scrambled to my feet, my lungs burning, my heart pounding. The boy was on his hands and knees, coughing and gagging. He was young, maybe 20, with a face that was gaunt and pale. He was wearing strange clothes, dark and shiny, not like any fabric I'd ever seen. It was smooth, like river-polished stone. On his back was some kind of metal pack, but his eyes held a lifetime of terror. He looked up at me and his chest was heaving. He was babbling, but not in any language I recognized. It was a torrent of desperate, frantic syllables. Then he saw the rifle I had strapped to my saddle, a saddle that was now 100 yards away, lying in the dirt next to a rapidly disappearing Diablo. The boy scrambled toward it. He was terrified of me. He grabbed the rifle by the barrel, didn't even bother to look at it, and held it out to me, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold it. "I need your help," he said, and the words came out in a perfect, unaccented English, completely different from his earlier babbling. His voice was raw, hoarse, and cracked with fear. "Please, you have to help me." My mind was a whirlwind. I didn't know him, didn't know where he came from, didn't know what the hell I'd just seen. I was just a man, an old cowboy, used to a simple life. I could barely help myself with my own aches and pains, let alone some hallucination that had appeared in a thunderclap of light. I was a cautious man. I kept my distance from strange things. My first instinct wasn't to help. It was to survive, to get my horse and get the hell out of there. This was too far outside my world. Are you real?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp. It was a foolish question, but it was all I could manage. He let out a choked sob, half laugh, half cry. He pointed a trembling finger back to where the air had split. "They're coming for me," he gasped. "I don't have much time. You have to hide me, please. They will kill me." The desperation in his voice was absolute. It was the sound of a man who had already lost and was now running solely on instinct. I took a step back, my hand instinctively going to my hip, but my pistol was in my pack. He was a stranger, a threat, an unknown. Then he dropped to his knees. He was on the verge of collapse. He clutched his chest, struggling to breathe. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead, and his eyes were wild, darting around the empty landscape as if expecting an army to appear at any moment. "Don't let them find her," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a whisper. He held his hand out to me, palm open. It was empty, but his gaze was fixed on it as if he were holding the most precious thing in the universe. "Please, I beg you, don't let them find her." I didn't understand. Her? Who was her? There was no one else with him. He was alone. "I don't know what you're talking about, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're in shock. There's no one here." He looked at me then, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, desperate resolve. He thrust his hand toward me, palm open, and this time something shimmered in it. It was a small metallic device, no bigger than a silver dollar, with a single beautiful blue light pulsing at its center. It wasn't a solid object. It looked more like captured lightning, a swirling vortex of blue energy. He pressed it into my hand. It was warm, warmer than a living thing, and I could feel a faint pulse like a heartbeat. "You don't understand," he said, his voice firming up for a second. "The life inside this is more important than mine, more important than yours. She must survive." He looked back at the empty space of air. "They're close. I can feel them. They'll kill us both if they find her with me. Keep her safe. Hide her from them, please." Everything inside me screamed to run, to drop the strange device and forget this ever happened. This wasn't my fight. This wasn't my world. But that one word, her, and the way he said it with such raw paternal love. It was the same way I looked at my own daughter, the same way I looked at my grandson. It was a plea that transcended language, a universal cry for the protection of something precious. Then the metal pack on his back started to beep, a low, insistent electronic whine. He looked at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. "There's no more time," he said. He took my hand, the one holding the device, and pressed it against his chest. Promise me you won't let them find her." I felt a pull, a sense of vertigo. It was a feeling of being stretched and compressed at the same time. And then, like water, like a dream dissolving upon waking, the boy began to fade. He didn't disappear in a flash of light. He became translucent, his edges blurring, his form dissolving into a fine, shimmering mist that was absorbed by the metal pack on his back. There was a soft, electronic sigh, and then he was gone. The pack dropped to the ground with a dull thud. A few feet away, a tin cup I'd set down earlier began to roll in a perfect circle, making a soft clinking sound against the rocks. My mouth hung open, my throat was dry. I looked down at my hand. The device was still there, the blue light pulsing warm against my skin. I thought of his final words. "Promise me." My first instinct was to drop it, to walk away, to get on my horse and ride away from this nightmare. But the warmth of it, the quiet pulse, felt like a heartbeat. A small, vulnerable, pleading heartbeat. I couldn't let them find her. I didn't know who them was. I didn't know what her was. All I knew was that a man, a terrified young man, had made the ultimate sacrifice to give it to me. He had pleaded with me, an old stranger in the desert, with a desperation born of total love, and I had given him my word. That was the cowboy's code. You don't break a promise. I had no idea what I had just agreed to, or what form the threat would take. But I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones like the cold of a winter night, that my quiet life was over. I had an oath to keep, and I had to make damn sure they didn't find her. The sound of my own breath was a ragged, hitching thing in the sudden silence. The whole world felt hollow, like a bell that had just been rung, the vibration still humming through the metal but the noise itself gone. The boy's pack lay in the dirt, a dark, ugly shape against the pale earth. It wasn't made of leather or canvas. It was a sleek, seamless material like a smooth black stone, and it was smoking slightly. Not with fire, but with a thin, wispy vapor that smelled of ozone and something else. Something that reminded me of the sharp, metallic tang of a fresh wound. I remember I just stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the scar in the sky had been. My mind was a complete blank. It was a defense mechanism, I think, a way to process the impossible by simply refusing to acknowledge it. An old rancher, a man of the earth, suddenly plunged into a world of shimmering light and fatting strangers. It was like being told the moon was made of cheese and then being given a slice. Diablo was gone. I looked to the horizon, but there was no sign of him, just a faint plume of dust to the east, quickly dissipating. He was heading for the old stables, I knew. He was spooked, probably spooked for life. That was another problem for another day. I had more immediate concerns. I looked down at my hand. The device, her as he had called her, was still there. The blue light pulsed steady and even like a tiny celestial heartbeat. It wasn't warm anymore. It was perfectly neutral, cool and smooth against my calloused palm like a smooth pebble from a riverbed, but I could feel it. I could feel a presence, a faint, indefinable essence that seemed to emanate from it. It wasn't a thought or a feeling, but something more primal, like the low hum of a distant power line. It was an awareness, a tiny spark of life. I had made a promise to a dead man, a ghost, and I'd given my word. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. It was the kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes after a shock, when the adrenaline fades and you're left with the trembling aftermath. I had to get back to the ranch. I needed to think, to sort this mess out. I couldn't just stand here in the middle of nowhere clutching a mysterious blue light. I carefully, gingerly, slipped the device into the pocket of my denim jacket. It was a good, sturdy pocket, one I kept my chewing tobacco in. I could feel the faint outline of it through the material, a constant reminder of what I'd just witnessed. It felt a little bit like I was carrying a secret that might burn a hole right through me. The walk back was a long one. Without Diablo, I was just a man on foot, a tiny, insignificant speck in the vast expanse of the high desert. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the sagebrush. I kept my head down, watching the ground, looking for the familiar landmarks that would lead me home. The silence was oppressive. Before, the world had been full of the buzz of insects and the chirp of birds. Now everything was still. The birds had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to have held its breath. About halfway home, I was crossing a dry creek bed, a place I'd known my whole life when I saw it. The first sign that the boy's warning wasn't just the raving of a frightened child. There was a patch of sand, smooth and undisturbed except for a set of footprints. I wouldn't have thought twice about it except for the fact that they were glowing. Just a faint, phosphorescent green, like the light of a firefly, and they weren't going in a straight line. They were circling. They were circling the exact spot where the boy had first appeared. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The footsteps were too big to be human, too uniform, with a bizarrely regular stride. They were the footsteps of something that moved with a purpose, something that was searching. They're close, I can feel them. The boy's words echoed in my head. I didn't need any more convincing. I took off at a brisk walk, a half jog, my heart thudding against my ribs. My hand instinctively went to my jacket pocket, to the warm, pulsing device. Don't let them find her. It was like a chant, a mantra. I arrived at the ranch just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the mountains. It was a modest place, a two-story farmhouse that had seen better days, a big red barn, a few corrals, and the old bunkhouse where my hired hands used to stay. It was quiet, just me and the ghosts of a family long gone. My wife, Clara, had passed 5 years ago. My daughter, Mary, lived in town with her husband and my grandson, Leo. It was just me and the critters now, and Diablo when he decided to come back. The first thing I did was go to the barn. I needed to check on the animals, make sure everything was normal. The yearlings were in their pen, milling about, but they were spooked too. They were huddled together in a corner, their eyes wide, their ears flat against their heads. I tried to soothe them with a few kind words, but they wouldn't come near me. I think they could smell something on me. They could sense I was different. I went into the house, locked the door behind me, something I never did, and drew the curtains. The house felt alien suddenly. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the grandfather clock that Clara loved, the smell of old wood and dust. It was the same, and yet it felt like a stage set, a fragile illusion of normalcy. I took the device out of my pocket and placed it on the kitchen table. I sat down, my knees weak, and just looked at it. It was tiny, intricate, and yet so simple. The surface was a dull silver like polished mercury. The blue light at its center was the only thing that gave it any life. It didn't look like anything from this world. It looked like it belonged in a child's storybook, a magical thing. What was it? A weapon, a treasure, a prison? He had said. The life inside this is more important than mine. It was a person, a living, breathing person, somehow contained within this tiny sphere. The thought was terrifying. It was a miracle, a blasphemy, a science I couldn't even begin to comprehend. My mind went back to the boy, his fear, his desperation. The way he looked at the device, his eyes filled with a love so fierce it was almost a physical force. It was the look of a father protecting his child, and he had trusted me, a stranger, an old man in the middle of nowhere. He had no other choice. The weight of that trust was suffocating. What kind of person was he to just thrust this upon me? What kind of man was I to accept it? I was a rancher, not a guardian. I was a cowboy, not a soldier in some cosmic war. I couldn't protect anything. I couldn't even protect my own horse from a loud noise. A bitter wave of anger washed over me, hot and sharp. This wasn't my responsibility. This wasn't my problem. I should have left it there. I should have walked away. My hand twitched. For a foolish moment, I considered throwing it away, tossing it into the well, or burying it deep in the desert where no one would ever find it. Then what would I have done? Broken a promise to a ghost. It would be like spitting on Clara's grave. A promise is a promise. It doesn't matter who made you swear it. Then the device started to pulse faster. It was a frantic, irregular beat. I froze. Had I somehow angered it? Had the light sensed my doubt, my desire to be rid of it? The pulse quickened, becoming a staccato rhythm, a miniature alarm bell. I felt a surge of panic. It was the same panic I felt when I saw a branding iron fall into a pile of hay. It was the visceral fear of an imminent, uncontrollable disaster. Suddenly, the device went completely silent. The light didn't just dim, it didn't flicker. It just stopped. One moment it was pulsing, the next it was utterly dead. The kitchen was plunged into a deeper darkness, the only light coming from the faint slivers of moonlight peeking through the curtains. The silence was absolute. The grandfather clock, which had been ticking steadily, had stopped. My own heartbeat seemed to be the only thing making a sound, a dull thud against my ribs. Then I heard it, a sound so faint I almost dismissed it as a trick of the mind. It was a scratching, a slow, deliberate scraping like fingernails dragging across the wood of the back door. A cold dread, like a block of ice, formed in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't a coyote or a raccoon. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was a sound of purpose. It was a sound of searching. The scratching continued for a few agonizing seconds, then stopped. A beat of silence passed. Then the doorknob started to turn. It was a slow, gentle motion, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side was being careful, trying not to alarm the occupant. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. I was frozen in my chair, my eyes glued to the dark shape of the back door. My rifle was in the corner of the room, but I'd have to cross the entire kitchen to get to it. I was an old man, and fear had turned my bones to jelly. The doorknob rattled once, then twice, then it stopped. A long, terrible silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. I didn't dare blink. I was staring at the door, willing it to stay closed, willing the nightmare to end. Then, just when I thought I might pass out from the tension, I heard a heavy, lumbering sound moving away from the door. It was a sound like something with huge, flat feet being dragged across the ground. The steps were slow, deliberate, and they seemed to go on forever, echoing in the night. I waited, counting my heartbeats, until the sound faded completely and the night was silent again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My body was trembling, but not from cold. I looked at the device in my hand. It was dark, inert. Had it sensed the thing outside? Had it stopped its pulsing to hide? The word came out of my mouth as a hoarse whisper. She was here. The entity, the thing, the life inside this piece of metal. She was real, and she was hiding. The thing outside was gone for now. But I knew with a terrifying certainty that it was just the beginning. The boy had pleaded with me to protect her. That was my new reality. It was no longer just about keeping a promise to a dead man. It was about survival. My quiet life was over. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my old leather armchair, the one I'd had since my father's time, a worn-out 30-30 Winchester across my lap, and just stared at the walls. The world outside the thin, lace curtains felt like a vast, hostile ocean, and I was shipwrecked on a tiny island. Every creak of the house, every groan of the old timbers settling, made my heart jump into my throat. I was listening for the return of that scratching, that heavy, dragging step. It was the kind of listening a hunted man does, and I didn't like it one bit. I was a man used to being on the open range, in control. Now I felt trapped in my own home. The device sat on the table, a silent black obelisk. I'd gotten used to its faint heartbeat, a constant thrum in the background of my consciousness. When it went dark, that presence vanished, and the silence it left behind felt more menacing than any noise. I kept expecting it to light up again, to start pulsing with that strange, otherworldly energy. I wondered if it was dead. I wondered if I'd failed the boy already, if the very nature of my home, the wood, the metal, the old, simple life of it all, had somehow suffocated the life inside. The thought made my stomach clench with a familiar guilt. Dawn arrived slowly, a pale gray light that seeped through the cracks in the curtains. It didn't bring relief, just more uncertainty. I was exhausted, my eyes gritty, my back aching from the tension. I got up stiffly and walked over to the table. The device was a small, dark circle against the scarred oak. I picked it up. It was cold, utterly lifeless. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its smooth, unblemished surface. There was no seam, no button, no switch. It was as if it had been grown, not made. I set it down and went to make coffee, a desperate attempt to feel normal. The coffee was bitter and strong, a familiar comfort in a world that had gone sideways. I stood by the window, peeking through the curtain at my land. The morning was quiet, a postcard of serenity. The yearlings were grazing. Diablo, the ornery old cuss, had returned and was standing by the water trough, looking perfectly peaceful. The long shadows of the mountains stretched across the valley. It looked the same as it always had, but I saw it with different eyes now. Every clump of sagebrush could hide a listener. Every distant rock formation could conceal a watcher. The sky itself seemed too bright, too wide, an invitation for something terrible to descend from it. I finished my coffee, the mug warming my hands, and decided to check on the animals. I had to get out of the house, to do something physical. It was the only way I could keep the fear at bay. I grabbed my hat and left the device on the table. I couldn't stand to be near it anymore. It was a burden, a reminder of a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. The air outside was crisp and clean, a welcome change from the stale atmosphere of the house. I walked over to the barn, my boots crunching on the gravel. I said good morning to the horses, running my hand along Diablo's neck. He flinched at my touch, his ears flicking back. He still remembered. He still held a fear of me, a fear of what I had been near. I was mucking out the stalls, the familiar, earthy smell of manure and hay calming my nerves when I felt it. A sharp, intense heat in my chest, right over my heart. It was so sudden and so powerful it made me gasp and drop the pitchfork. My hand flew to my chest, expecting to find a wound, a burn. But there was nothing, just the rough cotton of my shirt. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't a sound in my ears. It was a thought, a feeling, a direct transmission of meaning that bypassed language and went straight to my core. It was a woman's voice. It was gentle, laced with a profound, soul-deep weariness, but also a startling intelligence. "I am sorry, I did not mean to frighten you." I stumbled back a step, my heart hammering. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. I spun around, looking for the speaker. The barn was empty, just me and the animals. The horses were calm, munching on their hay, oblivious. "I am inside your mind," the voice said, the words forming in my head as clearly as my own thoughts. "Please do not be afraid. I am not a threat to you." My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body was frozen. I was having a conversation with a ghost that lived in my head, a ghost that was the small, dark device I had left on the kitchen table. You're her," I managed to stammer. "The girl, the life inside the light." "I am what is left of her," the voice said, and there was a profound sadness in it. "The body you see is gone. My consciousness, my being, was transferred into the core, the vessel I gave to Cale." "Cale," I repeated, my mind reeling. It was the first time I'd heard the boy's name. It felt like a secret, a piece of a puzzle I was just beginning to see. "The boy who brought me to you," she explained. "He was my friend, he was my protector. He gave his life so that I could survive. I was in stasis, a state of suspended animation while the core was dormant. When the threat came, he awakened me. There was a pause. He knew he would not survive the jump. He knew he was being tracked. He asked you to keep me safe." The pieces were falling into place, but they were forming a picture I still didn't understand. "Tracked?" I asked. "By what? What is that thing? The thing that was scratching at my door?" "They are called the scavengers," she said, and a new, sharper emotion entered her voice, fear. "They are like locusts. They feed on life force, on consciousness itself. They are attracted to energy, to the unique life that I possess." Cale knew they would follow him. He used the last of his power to hide his trail and to bring me to you. My blood ran cold. A thing that fed on consciousness. It was a monster from a nightmare, a creature born of the void. The image of that heavy, dragging step at my back door came flooding back. And here I was in the middle of a barn, the only safe place for this creature's prey. "Then why are you talking to me?" I asked, my voice tight. "Wouldn't they be able to sense you?" "I am shielding myself now," she said. "I am using a low-power signal, a form of communication that is very difficult to detect. I wanted to thank you. I wanted to tell you that I am grateful you accepted the responsibility. I know it was not your choice." "It wasn't," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "I didn't ask for this. I'm just a rancher." "I know, and I am sorry for that, but Cale believed in you. He saw something in you. He said you had a good heart. He said you were a man of your word." I had a good heart. I was a man of my word. Was that true? Or was it just what a desperate boy had said to a stranger to ensure his mission was complete? I looked down at my hands, the hands of a man who had spent his life wrestling with cattle and the land. They were strong, but they were also worn. Weathered by time and hard work. They weren't the hands of a protector, not like this. Then a small miracle happened. In the corner of the stall, a tiny, fragile-looking spider was spinning a web between the slats of the wooden wall. It was a delicate, intricate thing, a testament to persistence and patience. It was the tiniest detail, a microscopic piece of the great grinding machinery of the world, and yet it was completely perfect. It reminded me of something, that even in the face of terrifying, insurmountable odds, life continues. It adapts. It endures. A deep, quiet understanding settled over me. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about my fear or my reluctance. This was about something larger. It was about protecting a spark of life against the darkness. "Your name," I said, my voice a little clearer now. "What's your name?" "I am called Ilara." "All right, Ilara," I said, taking a deep breath. "We need to figure out what to do. You and I, we can't just stay here." "I know," she said. "The scavenger's ship is in orbit. It is searching for me. Kale was able to scramble their sensors for a time, but they will eventually find a way to pinpoint my location. We need to move. We need to find a safe place. There is a place on this planet where the energy signature is different, a place they may not think to look." "Where?" "There is a place to the north, a mountain range. The rock is rich in a mineral that disrupts their scanning technology. It's called, you call it, quartz, large deposits of it." I knew the place, the San Juan Mountains to the north. They were old, ancient, full of veins of quartz and silver. It was a harsh, unforgiving landscape, but it was also a place of hiding. My father used to tell stories about hiding there during the Apache Wars. It was a haven for fugitives. "The San Juans," I said. "It'll take us a week on horseback." "Then we must begin at once." Her voice was firm, but I could feel the fear beneath it. "We have to leave before the next cycle, before their sensors recalibrate. I will go back into a dormant state. When I do, you must carry me. I will be silent, invisible. You will be on your own." "Just one more thing," I said, my voice catching. "Why do you need to survive? What makes you so important to them?" A long pause stretched out. When she spoke again, her voice was just a whisper, laced with a profound, ancient sadness. "Because I am the last. I am the keeper of my people's knowledge, our history, our art, our souls. They want to destroy that, to consume it, to leave nothing but dust. I carry all our songs inside me. They are all that is left of my world. If they find me, everything we were will be gone. Forever." The weight of that truth settled on me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a life I was protecting. It was an entire culture, a universe of memory, a library of the soul. Everything my people had ever created, every poem, every painting, every moment of love or loss, was a speck of dust compared to what she carried. I wasn't just protecting a girl, I was protecting a people. Then the warmth in my chest vanished and the voice was gone. The connection severed. The device on the table in the house was just a cold, dead piece of metal once more. She was gone, trusting me to do what I had to do. I walked back to the house, my steps feeling heavier than they ever had. There was a new resolve in me. It wasn't born of courage, but of necessity. I was a man bound by an oath, not just to a dead boy, but to a civilization that no longer existed. I had to get to the mountains. I had to protect the soul of a world I would never see. I had to do it with nothing but my wits, my horse, and a cold, dark device that contained the last song of a dying star. The next few days were a blur of frantic preparation and grim determination. The boy had said they were coming, and I believed him. It wasn't just a vague feeling anymore. It was a cold certainty that had settled deep in my bones. I had to move. The ranch had been my home for over 40 years, a place of hard work and quiet contentment. Now, it felt like a trap. Every building, every tree, every familiar landmark seemed to be a possible observation point, a potential hiding place for the scavengers. I went through the motions of packing, my hands moving with a mechanical efficiency that belied the turmoil in my mind. I had an old, sturdy pack mule named Bessie. She was stubborn and cantankerous, a perfect companion for a man on a desperate mission. I loaded her up with supplies: dried meat, beans, coffee, ammunition for the Winchester, a canteen, and a bedroll. I didn't pack much else. Weight was the enemy. I'd have to move fast. The decision to leave was the hardest part. To abandon the life I'd built, the memories of Clara, the familiar sounds of the ranch. It felt like a betrayal of everything I'd ever known. But the alternative was unthinkable. The scratching at the back door had been a threat. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. If I stayed, they would find her. And if they found her, everything would be lost. I wrote a brief note for my daughter, Mary, telling her I was going up north to check on some cattle and that I'd be back in a few weeks. It was a lie, a flimsy one at best, but it was the best I could do. I couldn't tell her the truth. She wouldn't believe me, and even if she did, I couldn't bear to drag her into this nightmare. It was my burden, my promise. The first day on the trail was the longest. The landscape stretched out before me, a vast, empty canvas of brown and green. The sky was a deep, aching blue, a color that had always brought me peace. Now it just felt exposed, too wide, too empty. I kept my head on a swivel, my eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The silence was oppressive. The birds were still quiet. There was no rustle of animals in the brush. It was a dead, watchful silence. I kept my hand in my pocket, feeling the smooth, cold surface of the core. It was a constant reminder of my mission. Ilara was asleep, dormant, her consciousness hidden away. I had to get her to the mountains. I had to find a place where the scavenger's technology was blind. That night I made camp in a shallow draw, hidden from view. I didn't dare light a fire. The cold was sharp, biting through my clothes. I huddled in my bedroll, my hand on the rifle, listening to the wind whisper secrets in the sagebrush. My body ached with the accumulated tension, and my mind was a churning vortex of worry and doubt. I was a fool, an old, foolish man trying to outrun a threat that lived in the stars. What was I doing? I didn't even know how to fight these things. I was just a man with a gun, hiding in the darkness. I must have fallen asleep because I was startled awake by a sudden sharp noise. It was a crack, like the snap of a twig, but it was too loud, too precise. My eyes snapped open. I was in a state of perfect frozen alertness. The moon was high, casting a pale, silver light over the desert. I could see the outline of my horses, standing perfectly still, their ears pricked forward. They were sensing something, just as Diablo had done in the creek bed. Then I saw it, a shape moving against the horizon. It was too large to be a man, too fluid to be an animal. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, a predator scenting its prey. It was heading in my direction. It was methodical, sweeping back and forth, looking for something. The scavenger. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I didn't dare move. I just lay there, barely breathing, watching it come closer. It wasn't walking, it seemed to glide, its body undulating slightly as it scanned the ground. It had an elongated, angular form, like a spider, but with far too many legs. Its head was a smooth, featureless dome, and from its center a faint blue light pulsed, exactly the same color as the core's light. It was tracking her. It was homing in on her signal. I felt a surge of pure, primal terror. It was the fear of a prey animal, a helpless creature in the presence of its natural predator. My hand moved slowly, deliberately, to the rifle by my side. I had never killed a man before. I had never killed anything that wasn't for food. But I knew in that moment that I would fight. I would fight to my last breath to protect the life in my pocket. The creature stopped. It was only 50 yards away, standing motionless in the moonlight. I could smell it now. It was a sweet, sickly smell, like rotting flowers and burnt sugar. It was a smell that made my stomach churn. Then a voice, not in my mind, but from the creature itself. It wasn't a language, it was a series of clicks and chitters, like a million insects rubbing their legs together. It was a sound of pure malevolence, a sound of hunger. I don't know how I understood it, but I did. It was a command to surrender, a command to give it what it wanted. My hand tightened on the rifle. It was the only thing I could do. The creature took another step. It was closer now. I could see the details of its form. It had a hard, chitinous shell, and its legs ended in sharp, gleaming points. It was a machine, a living machine. It was beautiful and terrible, a perfect predator designed to destroy. I had to act. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie here and wait for it to find me. I had to buy myself time, a chance to get away. I raised the rifle, my hands shaking. I sighted down the barrel, aiming for the center of that pulsing blue light. It was the only thing that looked vulnerable. I squeezed the trigger. The sound of the shot was deafening in the silence. It echoed through the canyons, a sharp, defiant crack. The bullet hit the creature square in the chest. There was a brilliant flash of light, a shower of sparks, and the creature let out a high-pitched electronic shriek. It stumbled back, its body spasming. It wasn't dead, but I had heard it. I had slowed it down. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the reins of my horses. I didn't even have time to saddle them. I just threw myself onto Diablo's back, kicking him into a gallop. Bessie, the mule, followed, her long ears flapping. I rode. I rode like the devil himself was on my trail. I didn't look back. I just let the horse run, trusting his instincts to guide us through the darkness. The wind tore at my face, my eyes streaming with tears. It wasn't just the wind, it was fear. It was the terror of being hunted. I don't know how long I rode. An hour, maybe two. I just kept going, pushing the horses as fast as I dared. Finally, I couldn't go anymore. My body was a mass of aches and exhaustion. Diablo was foam-flecked and blowing hard. I pulled him to a stop in a narrow canyon, the walls of rock rising up on either side, offering a little bit of cover. I slid off his back, my legs giving way. I collapsed on the ground, my chest heaving, my heart threatening to burst from my ribs. The silence was absolute. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the blowing of the horses. The creature was gone for now, but I knew it was just a temporary reprieve. I had wounded it, but it would be back. It had found me once. It would find me again. It knew what I carried. I was a beacon in the darkness. I looked at my hand. The skin on my fingers was raw and bleeding. I had been gripping the reins so hard I'd torn the skin. The pain was a welcome, grounding sensation. It reminded me I was still alive, that the fight wasn't over. I had the core. I had Alara, and as long as I had her, there was still hope. As I sat there shivering in the cold, I heard a sound. It was a quiet, mournful hum. It wasn't coming from the core. It was coming from me. I was humming an old folk song, a song my mother used to sing to me when I was a child, a song about a lost love and a distant home. It was a song of longing, of a deep, soul-deep ache for something that was gone forever. It was the most human sound in the universe, and it was the most defiant. The trail to the San Juans was a harsh, unforgiving mistress. It wound its way through steep, rocky passes and dense, dark forests. The days were long, the nights were cold, and the fear was a constant, unwelcome companion. We pushed on, driven by a desperate hope, the memory of that terrible, clicking voice echoing in my mind. I knew the scavenger was out there somewhere searching for us. It was only a matter of time before it found us again. It was a game of hide-and-seek, and the stakes were the soul of a world. I was exhausted, running on fumes and pure, stubborn will. My body was screaming for rest. The cut on my hand had become infected, a dull, throbbing ache that ran all the way up to my elbow. I was filthy, my beard was long and scraggly, and my eyes felt like they were filled with sand. I was beginning to look like a ghost myself. We were 3 days into the mountains when the scavenger caught up to us again. I was leading the horses through a dense thicket of aspen, the leaves a shimmering golden green in the dappled light. I was so tired, so bone-weary, that I almost didn't hear the sound. It was a faint, high-pitched whine like a mosquito, but it was getting louder. It was coming from the sky. I looked up, my heart sinking. A small, dark shape like a metallic bird was circling high above. It was a drone, a scout searching for us. I urged the horses on, trying to find cover. I didn't have much time. The drone would find us soon, and then the scavenger would follow. I found a small cave, a shallow opening in the side of a cliff, partially hidden by a curtain of hanging moss. It was a good hiding place. I led the horses inside, their hooves echoing against the stone. The darkness inside was cool and damp. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I sat down, my back against the cold rock, and I closed my eyes. I had to think. I had to come up with a plan. I couldn't keep running forever. The scavenger was relentless. It would keep chasing us until I made a mistake. I was so deep in thought that I almost missed the feeling. It was a faint warmth in my chest, a familiar presence. I'm sorry, Alara's voice echoed in my head, weak and strained. I tried to stay hidden, but I can feel them. They are close. They are getting closer. We know, I said, my voice a dry croak. The drone saw us. It's just a matter of time. I have to tell you something, she said. My people, we had a way. We could create a powerful energy pulse. It would destroy a scavenger, but it would also burn out the core. It would end me. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? I am saying that when the scavenger finds us, I can use the last of my energy to destroy it. I can sacrifice myself to save you. It is the only way. No, I said, the word coming out as a sharp, defiant whisper. I made a promise. I won't let you do that. It is the only way to stop it, she insisted. I am a liability. I am the reason it hunts you. If I am gone, it will have no reason to pursue you. You can be free. You can go home. Home, I said, a harsh, bitter laugh escaping my lips. There is no home for me anymore. My home is gone. The place I knew is gone. I lost it the moment I met you. That was a lie. The home I knew, the simple, quiet life of a rancher, was gone, but I had found something else. I had found a purpose, a meaning beyond my own insignificant life. I had become a guardian, and I would not abandon my charge, not even if it was her last wish. The silence stretched out between us for a long time. Then I heard a sound. It was the sound of something heavy, something mechanical coming closer. The drone had found us. I scrambled to my feet, my hand going to my rifle. I shoved the core, the fragile vessel, back into my pocket. Stay quiet, I whispered. Do not make a sound. I crept to the entrance of the cave, peering out through the moss. The drone was descending. It was hovering just outside, its sensors scanning the area. It hadn't found us yet, but it would. It was only a matter of time. Then I heard another sound, a sound from the mountain. It was a deep, rhythmic hum, a vibration I could feel in my teeth. It was a sound of power, of immense, ancient energy. It was coming from the rock itself. The quartz. It was a rich vein of quartz, and it was doing something. It was disrupting the drone's sensors. The drone suddenly veered off, its lights flickering. It was confused. It couldn't lock onto our signal. It was flying in erratic circles, its system scrambled by the mineral deposits in the mountain. We had a chance, a small, improbable chance. I knew what I had to do. I had to lead the drone away, to lure it deeper into the mountains where the quartz was the strongest. Maybe I could trap it there, confuse it so completely it would be useless. I turned and looked at the core in my hand. It was pulsing gently. I could sense Alara inside, her presence a quiet, steady flame. I'm going to lead them away, I said, my voice firm. I'm going to take the drone on a chase. While I do, you stay here. Stay hidden. I'll come back for you when it's over. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me, she said. You don't have a choice, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. You're my responsibility, my promise, and I'm an old cowboy. I don't break my word. I left the cave, my heart pounding, and mounted Diablo. The horses were scared, but they trusted me. They had to. I took a deep breath. I could hear the drone hovering, searching, confused by the interference. I rode out into the open. I was a tempting target, a blazing beacon of humanity. The drone saw me. It locked onto me and began to descend. I kicked Diablo into a gallop, heading straight for the heart of the mountain. The drone followed, its whine growing louder. I rode like a man possessed. The trail was steep, treacherous, littered with rocks and fallen timber. I didn't care. I just kept going, pushing the horse faster, harder. The drone was right behind me, close enough that I could see the details of its metallic shell. I reached a narrow canyon, a place where the rock walls were sheer and the quartz veins were thick, visible in the rock as bands of milky white. This was it, the perfect trap. I pulled Diablo to a stop. I was at the end of the canyon. There was nowhere else to go. The drone descended, its sensors scanning me. It was trying to lock on to Alara's signal, but the quartz was too strong. It was confused. It was vulnerable. I had a choice. I could let it kill me and it would leave Alara alone, or I could fight. I wasn't a soldier. I was a rancher, but I knew how to lead a wild animal. I knew how to draw its attention. I knew how to make it follow me. I raised my rifle and fired. It was a desperate shot, but it hit the drone square in its sensor array. It let out a shriek, and for a moment it was blinded. It flew backwards, smashing into the cliff wall. There was a massive, blinding explosion of blue light and sound. I was thrown from Diablo, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I hit the ground hard, the world spinning around me. When I opened my eyes, the drone was gone. A massive chunk of the cliff face had been blasted away. The air was thick with dust and the smell of ozone. I staggered to my feet, my body aching. My ears were ringing. Diablo was gone, having fled in terror again. I was alone in the debris. I was alive. I had survived, but where was the core? Where was Alara? Panic flooded my system. I frantically searched the ground, pushing aside chunks of rock, my hands bleeding. The core was gone. It had been blasted from my pocket in the explosion. The world seemed to tilt. The air grew thick and I couldn't breathe. A cold dread like a river of ice flowed through my veins. The scavenger was gone, but so was she. I had failed. I had broken my promise. I sank to my knees in the dust. The sound of my own ragged breathing was the only thing in my ears. The sun was setting, casting a bloody, red light over the devastation. Then I heard it, a tiny, faint electronic chirp. It was coming from a crack in the rock. I crawled over to it, my hands shaking. I peered into the darkness. There, nestled in a small crevice, was the core. It was cracked, a spiderweb of hairline fractures running across its surface. But the blue light at its center was still pulsing, weak and flickering, but it was alive. It was alive. I pulled it out carefully, cradling it in my hands. It was warm, warmer than it should have been. It was dying. The energy it had used to shield itself from the explosion had taken its toll. The light was fading, growing dimmer. "Alara," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Can you hear me?" "I can hear you," she said, her voice a weak echo, a mere suggestion of sound. "I am fading. The damage is too great, but I wanted to thank you. You kept your promise, you protected me. You saved me." A tear rolled down my cheek, cutting a clean path through the grime on my face. "I couldn't save you," I said, my voice choked with a grief so immense it threatened to swallow me whole. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said, her voice a final, soft whisper. "You gave me a gift, a final song. I can see the faces of my people, I can hear their laughter, I can feel the warmth of their love. You brought them all back to me just for a little while. Thank you, my friend." The light in the core flickered once, a beautiful, final pulse, and then it went out. The device became a cold, dark piece of metal in my hand. I sat there in the gathering darkness, holding the dead core in my hands. The silence was absolute. The sun had set, and the stars were coming out, a million tiny pinpricks of light in the vast, dark sky. I didn't cry. I felt a calm settle over me, a strange, quiet peace. I had done what I had promised. I had protected her. She had died, but she had died free. She had not been consumed. Her soul, the soul of her people, was not devoured by the darkness. It had been allowed to fade away on its own terms in a moment of peace and gratitude. I looked up at the sky, at the endless expanse of stars. Somewhere out there her people's world had been. Somewhere out there their songs still echoed in the void, and I had been a part of it for a brief, impossible moment. I didn't know where the scavengers were or if there were more. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't even know if I could find my way back home. I was just a man, sitting in the dark, holding a broken piece of a dead world in his hands. I heard a distant sound. It was a mournful, lonely sound, a coyote crying at the moon. It was the most beautiful, heart-wrenching sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of life. It was the sound of earth. It was a song I would carry with me for the rest of my days. It was the song of a cowboy and a ghost, and the last of a dying star. I stood up slowly, my body aching, my mind reeling. I tucked the dead core into my pocket next to my heart. I had no horse. I had no supplies. I was lost in a mountain range in the dark. But I was alive, and I had a story to tell. A story of a promise made and a promise kept. A story of a man who, for a brief moment, had stood against the darkness and had been found worthy. I walked into the night. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. Somewhere out in the vast, empty mountains, a bird began to sing. It was a small, fragile sound, but it was a song. It was a song of hope, a song of a new beginning.